I don't believe in truth. There's no empirical evidence. I don't believe information exists because there's no physical evidence. I don't think knowledge exists because I can't see, taste, or touch it.
No, that's not how it works.
Welcome back, everyone, to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, I have the dubious pleasure of taking a look at another video from that personification of an extended gap year made by JimBob. This one being the third entry in his Arguments Against Atheism series, in which he addresses an apparent problem that atheists have with the evidence being presented by theists. So let's slide on down to the greasier section of the theist mess hall and see if JimBob has brought anything substantial to the table, or if once again we're just going to end up taking his lunch money and treating ourselves to another square slice of cafeteria pizza.
Good times. Good times.
The floor is yours, Jimbo.
When you ask an atheist, why is it they don't believe in God? One of the most common responses is, I don't see any good evidence.
On this, JimBob is fairly accurate when it comes to garden variety atheists utilizing colloquial terminology. It is, however, more accurate to say that a classic reason someone may not hold the belief that a god or gods exists is because any evidence or argumentation that they have thus far been presented has been insufficient in convincing them of the truth of the proposition and therefore does not warrant belief. Or, to put it very, very simply, they haven't seen any good evidence. And there really is no issue here so long as the atheist doesn't make the mistake of thinking that the lack of sufficient evidence justifies making the positive claim that no god or gods or unfalsifiable creating entities exists at all. And until such sufficient evidence is put forward by the claimant, meaning evidence that can be independently verified as corresponding with reality and is not predicated upon an individual's personal subjective experience, then the atheist position will remain justified.
In this video, I'm going to explain why the atheist thinks this is a good reason and why it's in fact not a good reason.
Well, that's interesting, given how I just broke down how it is a good reason because it provides justification for the position. The only way this reasoning would be bad is if there was in fact sufficient evidence for the existence of this God entity, which means JimBob's assertion here implies that he himself does actually possess the independently verifiable evidence that demonstrates the existence of his particular God to present. And when I say evidence, JimBob, I mean evidence, not some structurally valid argument you're making based upon how you're subjectively defining your God.
Welcome to Arguments Against Atheism. I'm JimBob. I'm here to give you the goods.
And hopefully those goods are the evidence we're asking for that would warrant belief in your proposition. Bring it on, JimBob. Make me a theist.
So when an atheist says, I don't believe in God because I don't see any good evidence, what they mean is they don't see physical evidence.
Oh man, that is just wrong.
Man, you can't even make it a minute before you try to throw all of philosophy into the garbage disposal, huh? So yeah, that form of evidence that you're referring to is what is demanded by the very nature of the claim that a God exists. If you're going to make the positive claim that a thing exists, there are criteria of existence that you have to meet. Firstly, by making the statement that a thing exists, you immediately invoke the classical laws of logic, in that the thing being proposed has an identity and that identity is discrete from anything else that exists. Secondly, in metaphysics, the first order property of existence is that which applies neutrally to anything and everything that is real. And in order to classify a thing as real, you must first independently demonstrate that that thing exists, that it has substance, and that it is discrete from anything else, including context. Lastly, if you are unable to do these things, then what you are actually doing is conflating existence with essence, and thus you're only referring to an abstract conceptualization, one to which you are imposing a nature that serves whatever function you have subjectively decided needs to be served. In short, you're just defining it into existence by claiming that its nature is that which is necessarily existing. So yes, the very claim of existence, which by virtue of the criteria of existence makes it an empirical claim, it is not unwarranted to demand accessible, physical, independently verifiable, mind and context independent evidence to support it. And if you have that, JimBob, please present it.
Now I wonder, Are there any underlying assumptions being made in regards to what evidence is?
No, there are no underlying assumptions regarding evidence as it pertains to demonstrating that a thing exists. There is just the investigation into the quality of the evidence, predicated upon the objectively demonstrable distinction between that which is real or mind-independent and that which is imaginary or mind-dependent, which for a thing to have the property of existence it cannot be.
Well, let's take a look. One obvious assumption the atheist makes is that all truth claims are empirical claims, which is a false starting assumption.
I can't believe you can lie like that.
You know, I'd really appreciate it, JimBob, if you'd stop trying to imply that all atheists are as philosophically bankrupt as you're demonstrating yourself to be. Yes, not all truth claims are innately empirical because not all truth claims reference mind-independent objects. Some truth claims reference abstract concepts. And I shouldn't have to be the one to tell you this, JimBob. Not all atheists are empiricists because empiricism is not logically entailed by being an atheist. There are atheists that hold to rationalism, and there are atheists that eclectically hold to tenets of both. But before I let you drag this into the weeds, JimBob, I have to point out that all of this is just a smokescreen because it's your claim that's still on the table. You don't get to invoke realness by making the empirical claim that your God exists, and then deride the atheist for asking for the empirical evidence that supports that claim because that is what is required. Now, if you were to make the claim that your God is just essence, then we couldn't ask for empirical evidence, could we? Because you'd just be referring to the nature of a concept. And while you might even hold to the ancient philosophical position of Aristotelian existentialism that essence precedes existence, which is fine, unfortunately, you're the one opening the door to this level of scrutiny by invoking the first order property of existence. It's not our fault you have a problem with the entailment.
Not all truth is obtained in the same way. If there are different ways of arriving at the truth of different types of claims, and God's existence isn't the empirical category, then we've already spotted a category error.
I'm afraid you couldn't be more wrong.
And that is where you fail, JimBob, because you're attempting to apply the term existence improperly. Now, if you want to concede that your God only exists as an abstract concept and not as a concrete thing existing independently of minds, then by all means. But you don't get to redefine terms just so you can try and fit a square peg through a round hole. You're the one making the claim that it exists, thus the burden is on you to demonstrate that empirical claim.
The atheist also assumes that a standard for sufficient evidence has been established.
Yes, as a matter of fact, a standard of sufficiency has been established, and it is done so by the very nature of the claim. We need only to refer to Hume's of miracles, that if the fact partakes of the extraordinary and the marvelous, the evidence received a diminution, greater or less, in proportion as the fact is more or less unusual. Or the 19th century essays of Pierre-Simon Laplace, where he states, the weight of evidence for an extraordinary claim must be proportioned to its strangeness. Or even Thomas Jefferson, who in 1808 expressed in a letter to Daniel Salmon saying, 1,000 phenomena present themselves daily which we cannot explain, but where facts are suggested, bearing no analogy with the laws of nature as yet known to us, their verity needs proofs proportioned to their difficulty. And for our more contemporary-minded audience members,
what counts is not what sounds plausible, not what we'd like to believe, not what one or two witnesses claim, but only what is supported by hard evidence, rigorously and skeptically examined. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
In short, because not all truth claims are equal in their extremity, the standard of sufficiency is established by the claimant themselves.
Is there only one type of evidence?
No, there's many types of evidence. This is not controversial. But just as forensic evidence is weighted more heavily in a court of law than eyewitness testimony alone, the question is the evidence you're presenting to support your God claim sufficient enough to warrant belief?
No. But in this case, empirical evidence is the standard they are going with.
Only by virtue of the nature of your claim, JimBob. Like I explained earlier, you make the claim that it exists, and that is an empirical claim. But if you're going to try to redefine existence in order to improve the sufficiency of your evidence, I can only promise you that it's not going to work out the way you think it is.
So let's see if they apply the empirical standard to their own beliefs. Is there anything the atheist believes or assumes without empirical evidence? Does the atheist believe in knowledge? Yes. Is there any evidence? No.
Wow, you actually went there and legitimately thought no one would notice.
That was very sneaky of you.
What you're doing here, JimBob, is called a false equivalence fallacy. What's even better is that you know it's a fallacy because by the lights of your own worldview, God and knowledge are not equivalent by any measure. Knowledge, by definition, is an abstract concept that doesn't refer to anything in the tangible world. When we say that knowledge exists, we are utilizing an abstract concept to refer to the set of facts, information, skills, or familiarity acquired by a person through experience or education. And when you claim that your God exists, JimBob, I have never once heard you use the term abstract concept to refer to it because you're too busy claiming that it is a thing that exists concretely and discretely from anything else. By virtue of their very definitions, these are not equivalent claims, and it's somewhat embarrassing that you thought you could get away with this.
Does the atheist believe that the regularity in nature will maintain tomorrow? Is there any evidence? No.
Actually, there is evidence that when employed to establish the highly accurate predictive models we utilize to understand reality, it indicates that the probability of regularity is to a high enough degree that it would be irrational to doubt it without evidence to reduce that probability. Is it absolute? No, but it doesn't have to be. It just has to be probabilistic to such a high degree that it warrants certitude. So ultimately, referencing the regularity of nature here is just a category error.
How about the laws of logic? Is there any physical, empirical evidence for the law of identity?
No, and no one is claiming there is because the laws of logic are descriptive of the universe. Nonetheless, the laws of logic, like knowledge, reference things that can be demonstrated to exist in reality. I can utilize the empirically verifiable evidence provided by genetics to demonstrate that a cat is a cat and not a dog, thus securing their identities. I can demonstrate the set of various skills that I have acquired or my knowledge through a physical application of those skills. Like when I work on an HVAC unit, make repairs to my car, or kick your ass in a response video. So your reference here is again, like knowledge, a false equivalence.
Does the atheist believe in concepts or universal categories? Meaning? These are all examples of things the atheist does in fact believe in. They exist in a particular way, but they are not empirically verified.
Well, that all ultimately depends on a number of facts, like if they're a nominalist or a realist. But ultimately, JimBob, you can reference all of the abstract concepts that you want. It doesn't change the fact that they are irrelevant to your initial claim, that your God exists, because your initial claim is not equivalent to any of these things. That is, unless you're conceding that your God exists as an abstract concept. I have to wonder, because it really seems like you're implying that your God has everything in common with abstract concepts, while you're simultaneously doing everything you can to avoid admitting that it is one.
So I think we have enough examples to demonstrate the atheist doesn't really apply their empirical standard to their own beliefs.
No, we do. We just comport that standard to the nature of the claim. And seeing as how your God exists claim is not equivalent to a claim about knowledge or meaning or any other abstract concept, you may want to back off this false equivalence fallacy before you make an even bigger fool of yourself.
But they certainly love to use it against Christianity.
Nature of your claim, my dude. You want us to stop asking for the evidence. Stop claiming that your God exists.
Of course, the atheist will say, well, those aren't my beliefs. Those are just my axioms.
You're really bad at this.
Okay, now you've gone completely into the weeds, JimBob. And I get that you're desperately trying to obfuscate your inability to back up your claim with sufficient evidence by drawing false equivalences to non-controversial abstract concepts and referencing what atheists may hold axiomatically as a red herring. Unfortunately for you, none of that is actually relevant because all you're really doing is just distracting from the nature of your claim. Unless, of course, you're invoking axioms as a way of subtly implying that you yourself hold to your position that a God exists axiomatically, which first would be you conceding that your position is unjustifiable, and second, given what you just proposed about atheists, would make this a tu quoque fallacy. My advice to you, JimBob, is to stop trying to deflect by invoking every single logical fallacy under the sun, and get to that sufficient evidence you implied you had back at the beginning.
Okay, then my axiom is God exists.
You didn't see that coming?
To further demonstrate the flaw in their empirical standard, what if we use their argument against God's existence against some of the things they believe and see how it sounds?
Well, that would just be silly because the nature of the claims are not equivalent, which is precisely why I'm going to skip this next section so that we don't have to watch JimBob's fallacy-lubed masturbation.
The problem points to a larger issue with using mere sense data and empiricism as the foundation of truth.
Again, that's not what's happening here, JimBob. You're still lumping these things together, your God and various abstract concepts, as though they are equivalent to one another. At this point, I'm going to have to call out your obvious prevarication and request that you get back to addressing your burden of proof as entailed by the nature of your claim.
Another assumption we hear is the claim, science and empiricism is the best way to truth.
Scientific methodology is one of the best tools that we can use to understand what is true, or that which corresponds to reality, because it has precise mechanisms built into it that serve to eliminate those things that can skew a conclusion away from the truth, like faulty data and confirmation bias. Thus, when someone claims that a thing exists, given that claim is empirical in nature, it stands to reason that we should apply the scientific method to determine if this thing actually exists in reality or just in the imagination.
Well, is that a truth claim? If it were true that science and empiricism is the best way to truth, shouldn't it be verified through the scientific method? Are you seeing the issue, atheists?
No, there is no issue, because the independently verifiable and highly accurate outcomes of the predictive models that we utilize are precisely how we confirm that our interpretations of the evidence are accurate. Stop trying to invent problems where none exist, JimBob.
Science and empiricism ironically rely wholly on immaterial concepts and assumptions that cannot be verified with those methods.
I see that you're subtly referencing the problem of induction. I honestly don't know why you didn't just come out and say it, but suffice to say, it's not the problem that you think it is, because we understand and readily acknowledge the limitations of induction and we work within those limitations.
When it comes down to it, all knowledge is faith-based.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
All knowledge is faith-based.
You serious?
I was actually stunned when I heard you say this. You actually put that on the internet for everyone to hear, and you literally have no idea that it is the stupidest thing you could have ever said. Now, I don't know if you have some proprietary definition of knowledge and faith that you happen to be operating with, JimBob, so all I can really do is assume that you're utilizing the definitions that we are all familiar with, and you're putting this out there in an attempt to drag atheists down to the level of theists, and you're doing so with the full expectation that your audience does know the difference, and so will just fill in the blanks themselves. Suffice to say, Jimmy boy, knowledge is not faith-based, nor is it equivalent to faith in any way. Now, we can approach the subject of faith in one of two ways, either through the origin of the word from its Proto-Indo-European root to the Greek word pistis, which refers specifically to things one feels or intuits to be true, like loyalty and honesty, as opposed to gnosis, which specifically refers to the things one can demonstrate to be true to others, otherwise known as facts. Or we can go through the book of Hebrews, which, while the specific words vary depending upon which version of the Bible you're referencing, states unequivocally that faith is belief in or hope for things that are not known to be true but are desired or felt to be true. Either way, these paths get us to the exact same conclusion, that faith and knowledge have literally zero in common, because knowledge refers to things that are either completely justified, meet the truth condition of tripartite analysis, or are true to such an extreme degree of probabilistic certitude that any doubt is rendered irrational until sufficient evidence to the contrary is presented. And faith specifically refers to things held as true sans any rational justification. In other words, an individual's personal intuitions, emotions, or desires. So either you really have no idea what you're talking about, JimBob, or you legitimately think your audience is dumber than a bag of hammers. I honestly don't know which is worse.
There, I said it. The icky word. Faith.
While I'm glad you seem to understand why you never should have brought faith to an epistemology fight, it doesn't change the fact that you did it and it makes you look like a complete tool.
Faith, in the atheist view, is belief without evidence, plain and simple.
Technically, belief without rational justification. But sufficient evidence would give you rational justification. So, tomato, tomato.
In the Christian view, the fact that everyone has faith is the evidence of things unseen, whether it's immaterial things like logic or truth or the notion of the past or the future or mind. There's no escaping a faith-based starting point.
Oh, Johnny, did you back the wrong horse?
And that is a bald-faced lie for which the purpose is nothing more than trying to drag the non-believer down to the theist level by drawing a false equivalence between feelings-based faith positions and evidence-backed confidence positions, all while silently conceding that faith is in no way an epistemological tool, and that your only real escape from this level of scrutiny is to chuck a straw man disguised as a tu quo que fallacy at it, which is pretty much the theist version of a cornered monkey flinging its poo at something it doesn't like or wants to scare away.
Well, of course we can still fling poo at them. That's tradition.
And the act of denying a faith-based starting point would require, well, faith in things without evidence.
Wrong again, JimBob. It just requires confidence. Confidence predicated upon the extreme accuracy of our predictive modeling. And while we readily acknowledge that it's not absolute, we're okay with that because 1, we, unlike you, are not making absolute truth claims, and 2, we, unlike you, are willing to improve our models and make them more accurate when presented with, oh, what was it? Oh, I keep referencing it. You know, it's that thing that you implied that you had at the beginning of the video. Oh, that's right. Fucking evidence.
You see, the atheist puts faith in their reasoning. They put faith in their senses.
You ever get tired of being wrong?
We have confidence in our reasoning and in our senses because our highly accurate predictive models confirm them. At this point, it really is no wonder why you so often hide your comment sections behind a paywall, JimBob, because if left open to the wild, you probably never live this down. Luckily for you, you have people like me who will put this out there for posterity. You're most welcome, by the way.
The atheist might say, well, there's a difference between faith and confidence. I have confidence.
You gotta love how he's had these things explained to him before ad nauseum, yet he continues to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. I really hope you're not expecting different results, JimBob, but I'm not confident that you aren't.
See how that works?
Confidence relies on faith in other things like the regularity of nature, your own reasoning, reliability, which assumes a past, present, and future.
No, that's not how any of that works. This statement of complete bullshit JimBob just made brings to mind one of the best things one of my physics professors ever taught me. He taught us that in the course of our work, we must remember that a thing is not true because it was true in the past, or because it most likely will be true in the future, but because it has been demonstrated to be true now.
There is no view that is wholly derived from evidence.
Well, we can identify one, and that's the initial presupposition that everyone makes in their worldview, and that is, it is the I that is having the experience. But after that presupposition, everything else that we make probabilistic truth claims about are predicated on evidence. And if there is no evidence, we simply reserve judgment until such evidence is presented, and we say we don't know. The problems that you're referring to, JimBob, specifically happen when you present truth claims as though they are absolutely true, and that is not what we are doing. Figure out your own worldview before you come gunning for anyone else's.
Therefore, the basis for truth is not empirical. If you don't believe me, just check the comments section of this video.
First, you're wrong again, but I've already explained why. And second, why check the comment section? You literally crushed yourself when you said out loud that all knowledge is faith-based.
That is literally the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Other people adding to that pile, while hilarious, is just superfluous. And we're gonna go ahead and skip this last section because it's just JimBob claiming that all the comments in the comment section are just gonna be doing all of the things that he talked about in this video. Which, of course, after I checked them, they aren't. The vast majority of them just call him an idiot in a variety of ways and point out all the things that I've pointed out in this response. And then he turns around and makes a bunch of nonsensical claims about what logic is and how brains work. And the whole reason he does this is so that he can tie everything back to his first video in his Arguments Against Atheism series, which you can see debunked over on Logic's channel. Now, typically, I like to try and end these response vids with a way that we can bridge the divide. But given the extreme nature of JimBob's intellectual dishonesty, as evidenced by his repeated refusal to acknowledge anything that has been explained to him ad nauseum or apply it in any way to his worldview, I've concluded that we can only really bridge the divide with those members of JimBob's audience whose general lack of education in these matters he's taking advantage of. These various concepts that this personified hangover is throwing around are far deeper and more complex than he's letting on. By reducing these topics in such an intellectually dishonest way, he's better able to manipulate those individuals with less acumen than himself. And believe me, that's not setting the bar very high, and thus convince them to give him money. The only advice that I could really give these people is don't rely on YouTubers to be your only source for philosophical education. I will be the first one to tell my audience that I am but one resource among many, and that their first stop should always be academic sources. Spend some quality time with the SEP, audit a few philosophy classes, read the works of any number of philosophers that you can get your hands on. Be willing to do the work, engage in discussion, and exchange ideas, and never hesitate to ask questions.
Excuse me.
It is through that process that we, despite any of our disagreements, will constantly help each other to improve. This way, we can fully embody the positive changes that we want to see in the world because we won't end up thinking silly things like all knowledge is faith-based.
Yeah. Pretty crazy, right?
Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, July is National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. A link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And if you love scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at the Week in Horror podcast, now in our 5th season. Everything you need to become a channel member here, get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear, or support the podcast is down in the description. Once again, a massive thank you to each and every single one of you for your continued support of this channel, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide. Huh. Damn, that brings back memories.